You filled up your tank this morning. You probably noticed the price was higher than last week. Maybe you thought it was just inflation. Maybe you thought it was the usual seasonal fluctuation. Maybe you didn't think about it at all. Just swiped your card, watched the numbers spin, and drove away. What you didn't think about was Iran. What you didn't think about was a narrow strip of water, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point on the other side of the world. A waterway you have probably never seen, in a region you may never visit, controlled by a government that has just declared it closed to all shipping. The Strait of Hormuz, the most important 21 miles of ocean on Earth. And what happens in those 21 miles, right now, today, as you are watching this, is directly, personally, immediately connected to the price on that pump, to your heating bill this winter, to the price of every product that gets shipped, manufactured, or transported using energy, to the retirement savings that are invested in an economy that runs on oil. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, and the moment it did, your wallet became a battlefield. Today, we are going to explain exactly how that happened, what the strait actually is, and why it matters so much, what Iran did and how quickly the markets responded, what it means in dollars and cents for ordinary American families, why the Navy's plan to escort tankers is harder than it sounds, and what history tells us about how long these disruptions last and how bad they get before they end. Because the people who told you this war would not affect you at home were either lying or didn't understand what they were talking about. And you deserve the honest analysis. Let's start with the geography, because most Americans have a poor intuitive sense of why this particular stretch of water matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow passage between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf, where Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE produce and export their oil, to the Gulf of Oman and the open ocean beyond. It is, in the most literal sense, the exit door for the energy that powers the modern world. Through those 21 miles every single day passes approximately 20 million barrels of oil. 20 million barrels. That represents roughly 20% of the world's total daily oil consumption. 1/5 of all the oil the world burns. In cars, in trucks, in ships, in aircraft, in factories, in power plants. Transits through a channel so narrow that on a clear day you can see both shores simultaneously. The shipping lane itself is even narrower than the overall strait. There are 2 shipping lanes, one for traffic moving in, one for traffic moving out, each approximately 2 miles wide. 2 miles wide. The George Washington Bridge across the Hudson River in New York is 1.2 miles long. The lane through which 20 million barrels of oil pass every day is less than twice the length of that bridge. Wide. There is no meaningful alternative. This is not a situation where you can reroute through a different waterway if the strait is closed. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline, the East-West Pipeline, that can move some of its oil to the Red Sea, bypassing the strait entirely. At maximum capacity, it can handle about 5 million barrels per day. That leaves 15 million barrels per day with nowhere to go, every day. And the LNG, the liquefied natural gas that Qatar exports, that heats homes and generates electricity across Europe and Asia, has no pipeline alternative at all. It moves only by ship, through the strait, and when the strait is closed, it doesn't move. This is the weapon that Iran has been holding over the world's head for 40 years. Not its nuclear program, not its proxy forces. The strait, the exit door, the 21 miles that it controls from the northern shore. Oh, now let's talk about what happened on February 28, 2026, and what it did to the global oil market within hours. When the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the first Iranian responses was the declaration that every American and Israeli planner had feared and every energy analyst had been gaming out for years. The IRGC transmitted warnings on VHF radio to every vessel in the strait. No ship is allowed to pass. Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander said he would set fire to any vessel that attempted transit. Within hours, tanker traffic in the strait dropped by 70%. Over 150 ships anchored outside the strait, waiting. Their captains were not cowards, they were making rational decisions. An Iranian missile or drone could turn a supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil into a fireball visible from space. No insurance policy covers that. No shipping company can absorb that loss. The rational decision was to wait. Within days, traffic went to effectively zero. The Strait of Hormuz, the busiest energy corridor on Earth, went quiet. The oil market reacted immediately. Brent crude, the international benchmark, had been trading around $70 per barrel before the strikes began. In the first trading sessions after the strait closure, it spiked sharply. The freight rate for supertankers moving oil from the Middle East to China surged 94% in a single day. Oil prices climbed 6% on Monday alone. Another surge followed Tuesday. The maritime industry designated the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, and the entire Persian Gulf as a warlike operations area, the most severe designation available, typically reserved for active combat zones. Insurance premiums for vessels attempting transit became prohibitive almost overnight. Shipping giant Maersk suspended its Middle East operations. A second major carrier followed. Oil storage tanks across the region began filling up as production continued, but exports stopped. Analysts warned that if the closure continued, producers would eventually have to halt production entirely because there would be nowhere to store the oil. Trump, asked about rising gas prices at a press conference, said, "If they rise, they rise." That was not a reassuring statement for the 260 million licensed drivers in America who fill up their tanks every week. Let's translate these market numbers into what they actually mean for your life. The United States produces roughly 13 million barrels of oil per day, more than any other nation on Earth. America is energy independent in the sense that it produces more oil than it consumes domestically. So many Americans reasonably ask, why does a disruption in the Persian Gulf affect American gas prices if we produce our own oil? Because oil is a global commodity. It trades on global markets. When supply anywhere in the world is disrupted, prices everywhere in the world respond, regardless of where your local oil comes from. Think of it this way. Imagine a swimming pool connected to a network of pipes from many different sources. You have your own pipe filling your end of the pool, but the pool is connected to everyone else's pipes too. If someone blocks the pipes at the other end of the pool, the water level in the whole pool drops, including your end. It doesn't matter that your pipe is still running. The total pool has less water, and the price of water goes up for everyone. That is how global oil markets work. American oil is priced against the global benchmark. When the global benchmark rises because 20% of the world's supply is suddenly unavailable, American oil prices rise with it, regardless of how much oil Texas or North Dakota produces. The math is straightforward. Every dollar increase in the price of a barrel of oil translates to approximately 2.5 cents per gallon at the pump. If oil prices rise $30 per barrel, which is a conservative estimate for a sustained strait closure, that is 75 cents per gallon added to every fill-up in America. For the average American who drives 15,000 miles per year in a vehicle that gets 30 miles per gallon, that is 500 gallons of gasoline per year. At 75 cents extra per gallon, that is $375 extra per year per car, coming directly out of your pocket. For a family with 2 cars, that is $750 per year in additional fuel costs. Before you pay a single additional dollar for the heating oil that warms your house. Before you pay more for natural gas. Before you pay more for every product that gets delivered by truck, which is essentially every product you buy in any store. Groceries, medications, electronics, clothing, building materials. Everything that moves on a truck costs more when diesel costs more. Everything that costs more to manufacture costs more to buy. The Strait of Hormuz is not a foreign policy story. It is a personal finance story that lives in your kitchen, your gas tank, and your heating bill. Let's talk about something that gets almost no coverage in the American media, but may be the most economically significant consequence of the strait closure for Americans: Asia. 84% of the oil that transits the Strait of Hormuz goes to Asian markets, primarily China, India, Japan, and South Korea. These four nations are the manufacturing centers of the global economy. Their factories produce the electronics, vehicles, appliances, medications, and industrial equipment that American consumers and businesses depend on every day. Japan and South Korea obtain approximately 95% and 80% of their crude oil respectively from Middle Eastern sources, almost all of it transiting the strait. China gets roughly 40% of its total oil imports through the strait. India, whose economy is growing rapidly and whose energy dependence on Gulf oil is increasing, is similarly exposed. When their energy supply is disrupted, their manufacturing slows. When their manufacturing slows, the supply chains that feed American stores and factories are disrupted. When supply chains are disrupted, prices rise and availability falls. For everything from the car you want to buy, to the smartphone in your pocket, to the generic medications that millions of Americans take every day, and whose active ingredients are manufactured in Asian pharmaceutical plants. This is not a theoretical concern. Supply chain disruptions caused by COVID-19 added roughly 2 to 3 percentage points to American inflation over 2021 and 2022. The car shortages, the appliance backlogs, the semiconductor shortages that made everything from gaming consoles to hospital equipment hard to find. All of that flowed from Asian manufacturing disruptions. A sustained Strait of Hormuz closure affecting Asian manufacturing would produce similar or worse effects, with the additional fuel cost shock layered on top, creating a double inflationary pressure that the Federal Reserve would face with far less room to maneuver than it had going into 2022. The Fed would face an impossible choice: raise rates further to combat the new inflation wave, risking a recession, or hold rates and allow inflation to run hot again. There is no good option when the strait is closed. There is only the choice of which economic pain to accept. Now let's talk about Trump's naval escort plan, because the president has announced a response, and that response deserves honest evaluation. Trump announced that the United States Navy would escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, and that the government would provide political risk insurance and financial guarantees for shipping companies willing to attempt transit. He wrote on Truth Social, "No matter what, the United States will ensure the free flow of energy to the world." This is not a new idea. The United States Navy escorted tankers through the strait during the Tanker War of the 1980s, a conflict between Iran and Iraq that threatened international shipping. Operation Earnest Will, launched in 1987, reflagged Kuwaiti tankers under American registry and provided naval escorts. It worked to a degree. American warships provided a deterrent that allowed some oil to continue flowing, but the 2026 situation differs from the 1980s in several critical ways. In the 1980s, Iran had a far more limited anti-ship missile capability. The Silkworm missiles that Iran used were slow, relatively inaccurate weapons. Today, Iran's anti-ship arsenal, even after days of American strikes, includes shore-based Noor and Qatar cruise missiles with ranges of 120 to 200 kilometers, fast attack craft capable of swarm tactics, and the ability to seed the narrow waters of the strait with mines. The same 21-mile width that makes the strait strategically critical makes it a tactical nightmare for escorting warships. There is no room to maneuver. The Iranian coastline is always within missile range. The shipping lanes run close to the Iranian shore. Mine warfare is the particular concern that American naval planners find most alarming. Mines can be laid at night by small boats that are difficult to detect. Even a small number of mines in the shipping channels creates uncertainty that drives insurance costs to prohibitive levels. Mine clearing is slow, dangerous work. It cannot be done quickly. Clearing mines from a 2-mile-wide shipping lane while Iranian fast boats and shore-based missiles threaten the mine-clearing vessels is one of the most difficult naval operations that exists. The naval escort option buys time and signals resolve. But it does not eliminate the threat, and some tanker captains and shipping executives have made clear that no American naval escort will convince them to transit a minefield under Iranian missile threat. Let's look at the history of oil supply disruptions, because history is the best guide to how bad this gets and how long it lasts. The 1973 Arab oil embargo lasted 5 months, from October 1973 to March 1974. It reduced American oil supplies by roughly 7%. The result, gas lines stretching around city blocks. The price of oil quadrupled. The economy entered a recession that lasted until 1975. The psychological impact was profound. Americans who lived through it never forgot it. The 1979 Iranian Revolution disrupted Iranian oil production and triggered a second oil shock. The price of oil roughly doubled. The United States economy experienced stagflation, simultaneous high inflation, and high unemployment. That persisted into the early 1980s. These disruptions affected a smaller share of global oil supply than the current strait closure. The 1973 embargo affected roughly 7% of American oil supply. The current strait closure affects 20% of global oil supply, 3 times larger, and involving LNG as well as crude oil. The disruptions also lasted months, not days. The 1973 embargo was 5 months. The 1979 crisis disrupted oil markets for over a year. If the current strait closure lasts weeks rather than days, which seems likely given that the war itself is projected to last 4 to 5 weeks and possibly longer, the economic consequences will be serious. If it lasts months, they will be severe. There is one more dimension to this story that most analysts are not discussing publicly, but which shapes everything else. The strait closure is not an accident. It is a strategy. Iran's military is weakened. Its air defenses have been degraded. Its leadership has been killed. Its naval vessels are being sunk. By conventional military metrics, Iran is losing this war badly. It cannot defeat American and Israeli air power. It cannot stop the strikes. It cannot protect its own territory. But Iran does not need to win militarily to achieve its strategic objectives. It needs to make the cost of the war high enough that the political will to continue the operation collapses before Iran's capacity to resist does. The strait closure is that strategy in its purest form. Iran cannot defeat the American military. It can make the American economy hurt. It can make European economies hurt. It can make Asian economies hurt so badly that their governments pressure Washington to negotiate, to pause, to find an exit. Every day the strait stays closed, the economic argument against continuing the war gets stronger. The gas prices that Americans see at the pump are not just an economic indicator. They are Iran's most effective political weapon. Not missiles, not drones, arithmetic. And the arithmetic is working. Stock markets have fallen. Consumer confidence is declining. Congressional voices that were quiet when the strikes began are getting louder as the economic consequences become visible. The same democratic dynamic that has ended every previous American military operation that lacked clear objectives and clear timelines is activating again. The strait will reopen eventually. Every closure in history has ended. The question is how much economic damage accumulates before it does. The answer depends on how quickly Iran's remaining anti-ship capabilities can be degraded to the point where tankers will transit with naval escorts. It depends on whether Iran's leadership, whatever leadership emerges from the current succession crisis, decides that the strait closure is costing Iran more than it is costing the world. It depends on whether the global economic pain generates enough diplomatic pressure to create a negotiated pause. None of those questions have clear answers today. What is clear is that the strait is closed, the economic consequences are real and growing, and the connection between a waterway most Americans have never heard of, and the price they pay at the pump every week is direct, immediate, and unavoidable. You filled up your tank this morning. You paid more than last week. Now you understand why. The 21 miles of water called the Strait of Hormuz is not a foreign policy abstraction. It is the most important real estate on earth for your family's economic security. Iran knows it, and Iran has decided to use it. If you want to understand how the U.S. Navy plans to reopen the strait, what China's energy crisis from this closure means for its Taiwan calculations, and how long American public support for this war can survive gas prices that keep climbing. Subscribe now. Naval Power, because the ocean is where the next war begins.